Haley, good morning. Not good morning, good afternoon. It's great to be here. As Haley mentioned, I did do a workshop. When was it? Was it what, April?
Yeah,
April. I know Christina attended. Anybody else sit in on the last workshop that I did? No? Okay. So for just about all of you, you'll be seeing the movie for the first time. Christina, some of this might be a little bit of a review. My name's Dave Fischer. I'll give you a little bit about my background. That's not really that important. What is important is that you invested a couple of hours of your time this afternoon. The title of the workshop is called Selling for the Non-Selling Professional. All right. Another way you can think about it is selling for entrepreneurs. But really, this workshop will be whatever you want it to be, and I'm going to get some feedback from you in a couple of minutes. So we're going to go until, I think, what do we have, 5 o'clock. So I know I'm competing against some really good weather out there. I'm here until 5. In fact, the last time we did this, we actually stayed until 5:30. And so I'm here for as long as you're getting value out of this. If at any point you say, you know what, this is good, but I have to dip out, go ahead. I won't get upset, all right? But if you're getting value and you want to stay, by all means, like I said, I'm here until at least 5, and I could probably stay a little bit later. Does that work time-wise? Anybody need to cut out early? Is that good? Okay. So what you'll see is that I don't like to do my sessions like a traditional lecture. As you can see, I don't have slides. I have a whiteboard and I have some flip chart paper. I'm pretty old school and low tech. The fact that I have a microphone going on, like, this is a big deal for me. All right. So this is being recorded, all right, which means that we have to keep the swear words to a minimum. And again, purpose of this session, it's really interactive. I want to hear what's going on in your world. Some of you are just starting businesses. Some of you are thinking about starting businesses. Some of you are in your business and you're having success. Whatever stage you are in your business, right, we have to sell. The unfortunate thing is, and as you heard, I'm a Columbia graduate, they don't teach you how to sell in school. They don't teach you in grade school, they don't teach you in high school, they don't teach you in college, they don't teach you in business school, or they teach you very little. And for those of you that go out there and have a business now, all of a sudden you have to go out there and do what? We have to sell. So I'll tell you about my background, but my goal this afternoon is really twofold. Number one, if you can walk out of here with at least one thing that you can implement into your businesses right away, then I feel like I've done my job today. Okay, so that's my main objective. The second thing I like to tell people is, yes, my goal and what drives me is to help people get more effective at selling, but I also believe it's equally as important that you feel good about yourself in the process. And we'll talk about that as well, all right? And here's the last thing I'll say. If you're thinking of specific situations in your world, maybe it's a specific meeting you have coming up with a client, maybe you're in the middle of an actual deal and it's stalled or you're getting an objection, then we can role play that. You can share with me what's going on. I'm happy to role play that as well. We did that last time. All right. So we're going to be making this very informal. Feel free to interrupt, push back. If you hear something that doesn't make sense, let me know. All right. And then the final thing I'll say is I'm left-handed. Any lefties in the room? We have, okay, 2 lefties. My handwriting right now is neat because I had a little bit of time to think about this, but if throughout the workshop I'm writing fast and you can't read something, just let me know because that's my problem, not yours. All right, so here's the first question for you. And by the way, unlike in business school, I won't cold call. So if you don't want to participate and you just want to hang out and sit back and relax, fine. I'll only call on you if your hand is raised. But here's what I'd like for you to do. Take a minute, take 2 minutes. I just want you to think in your world, okay? When you're thinking about sales and selling, and let me just define that quickly. All right, selling in my world is essentially the conversation that occurs. So there's marketing and there's prospecting, and we'll talk about that. But at some point, right, you have to engage a prospective buyer. And I believe that that's where selling takes place. It's that conversation. So in your world, when it comes to sales, when it comes to selling, all right, either I or my company, or maybe those within my company that do sell, could be more effective at selling if I could overcome the following. All right, blank, blank, blank. And blank, blank, blank is really whatever it is in your world. caveat to that, things within your control. So if you say, well, if the economy were better, I could sell more, and that's certainly true, but not within your control. If I had nicer prospects, I could sell more. I mean, we'd all love nicer prospects, but again, not within your control. So in your world, if I could sell more, I could bring in more business, I can close more deals, if I can overcome blank, blank, blank. I'll give you a minute or two to jot some things down. Great. So you wrote down a couple of things. Who would like to go second? So people don't trust you. All right. So is the question how to get them to trust you? Okay. Great. Thank you. Some more.
How to get the first appointment?
How to get the first appointment. All right. I'm sorry. Tell me your name.
Amanda.
Amanda. And do you have a business?
Yes.
What do you do?
Our company is selling facial masks.
Facial masks. Okay.
It's like a new product for Americans. Now we are talking to Tennis Salon. Like we are trying to extend our distributors. So that's why we face a lot of sales challenges.
Okay. Great. And your business is?
It's kind of Time Out, the Latin community, a magazine.
So it's like Time Out. Great. And your name is?
Norberto.
Norberto. Okay. I'll keep asking you your names. Normally I have people write their names in front of me, and so it just helps me to remember it. Great. Some others.
I think to me there's an aspect of self-motivation first, but also motivation of the team, especially the non-sales people in the team, to still be involved somehow in the sales process.
Okay.
So I think it just helps when you get a lot of moves.
And Claude, right?
Claude.
So Claude, when your team members are telling you that they don't want to sell, right? What are the reasons they're giving you?
Very often is they don't know how to start the conversation.
Okay. All right.
And very often also they're just scared of being rejected, or they're scared of the first rejection.
All right. That's a good one. Fear of rejection. Show of hands. Show of hands. And I have mine raised very high. Anybody fear rejection?
Of course.
Yeah. We'll touch on that a lot. All right.
You say more than rejection, like the unclosed loop, like fear of nothing.
Fear of nothing.
Of no feedback, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, rejection's great because you have finality to it. Right. All right. That's good. That's good. We'll touch on that. Great. And your name is?
Peter.
Peter. Okay. Awesome.
I'm better at making the ask.
The ask. So like closing.
Yeah.
How to close. Yeah, it's a tough one, right? That was one of my biggest challenges. I started selling right out of my undergrad, and I was really good at opening the door, and I was great at presenting. When it came time to close, man, it had to like smack me in the back of the head to get out some sort of a close. We'll talk about that too. Great.
Getting the model right.
Getting
The sales model right.
the sales model. Okay, so when you say the sales model, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I've got a B2B business which I'm going to sell globally. What's the model for selling? Do I have a person in each market? Do I have a third-party distribution partner?
Got it, okay. So sales infrastructure. All right, good. I like these. Some more.
Knowing whether the prospect is serious or not, like okay. Qualifying the prospect.
Qualifying. All right.
You want to run anything.
Great. And tell me your name?
Dalton.
Dalton. Great. I like that one. Qualify. All great ones so far.
Getting users or buyers to try your product.
So get people to try. All right. Now, how would that be different from the close, though?
We work in software, so like all startups want people to try their.
So in other words, getting the demo,
Yeah,
or getting proof of
model.
concept.
Yeah, just convincing people that they should try something.
Okay.
before they go first. That's good.
Okay.
In today's startup world, it's all
All right. And your name again is? Jeet. And Jeet, you're new, right? First day for this crew? Okay. So Jeet, you touched on something which I think is really important, right? Convincing.
Yes.
All right. Now, part of what I plan to do today is I plan to challenge some of your beliefs, okay? My belief is that you cannot convince anybody of anything. Because if I try to convince you, right? So Norberto, if I try to tell you that your shoes are gray, what is Norberto's visceral reaction? What is it to do? His response is to do what? Yeah, they're gray, or he might say, well, they're not actually gray, they're kind of an off-color shade of gray, right? So we have a visceral reaction that when someone's trying to convince us of something, we resist. A lot of what I'll talk about today is it's a lot easier to facilitate a discovery with your buyer than it is about actually trying to convince them. Okay, good. So a couple of other hands raised.
Sometimes you don't know if you're talking to the right person. Does he or she have the right to make a decision about the stuff that you're talking about?
So getting to the right decision maker.
And going to the client discussion, sometimes the buyer doesn't know what he or she wants.
Buyer doesn't know what they want.
Discuss this through with you. So you can't go too high or too low because they don't know what they want.
Yep.
That's the risk.
Okay, good. Decision maker, that's a big one. Anyone else have any issues with that, the decision maker? You ever have the phenomenon with what I call the mystery decision maker? You're at the end of the sales process, you think you're getting an answer, yes or no, and then all of a sudden mystery door number 2 opens and there's this new decision maker. All right, so we'll talk about that. Great, couple more. All right. One thing didn't come up, maybe it's not an issue, but it always comes up, price, how to get the conversation away from price. Is that something we should put on there? Price?
We have like a price conflict all the time. For example, like these kind of distributors, they always ask a very, very low cost. And they expect actually your margin is very high. So they always say like, negotiate with you for a while. And then we didn't close the negotiation in the end. So price issue always occupy the major point of the sale.
Okay. So price issue. And then we'll even equate that as how do you do price versus value? All right.
Adding something to that point, how to negotiate partnerships in terms of the business, the whole business, shares of the business, in which way, what is important, how to evaluate the different aspects of a small company.
Okay, so you're talking about ownership of the company.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll put that up there. I don't know if we'll necessarily get to that, okay? But we might need to take that offline.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
How much following up is required?
Ooh, how much following up, right? Right. We don't want to cross that line where we're like a stalker. And we may have felt that way. All right, how much following up? Good. All great ones. Maybe one more? Switching from an existing product. Okay.
On this one, we're all, like a lot of us are startups, so sometimes we go against big guys.
Yeah.
So you're selling against other established players, bigger companies, and all that.
We'll call this, and I don't know if this is the right word, but ousting the incumbent.
Yeah.
Is ousting a word? Yeah? I've been out of business school for 5 years, so right, I do have the diploma, I promise you. Okay. So I think this ties into a lot about that discovery piece and convincing, and we'll touch on it. Great. All right. So here's what I would like to do next. I'm going to give you a formula. All right. You knew it's business school, right? Had to have a formula. Easy formula for you to think about for sales, and from there we're going to talk about process. Because a lot of the things that you put on here have to do with your actual sales process. Now, depending upon your experience, you might have a well-defined sales process, but if you don't have a well-defined sales process, I can promise you that you're following your buyer's process. And the buyer's process is a very, very frustrating process to be in. If you don't have a process, all right, the second thing you'll leave with today, in addition to the formula, is a process. So that's the deliverable for this afternoon. And like I said, I'll give you opportunities for you to hear how does that process work in my world. So let's talk about the formula, all right? So really easy formula, all right? We'll call this side of, so it's production equals the number of opportunities that you are in front of. And we'll touch on this. So number of opportunities that you are in front of. There's a couple of ways this can happen to you in sales. If you have a good marketing campaign, if you're really good with social media, opportunities will find their way to you, SEO, so on and so forth. Okay. So first question to ask yourself, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. This could be your homework. How many opportunities, all right, do I need to get in front of, or do I need to be presented with in a given week, in a given month, in a given year? Now, embedded in this is a very horrible word in sales, which is called prospecting. So here's my first question out to the group. What's the difference between prospecting and marketing?
Is it about qualifying those opportunities?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of qualifying. Yep. Okay.
Prospecting, you don't know exactly the target that you're trying to get into sales, or marketing, you have more of a solid idea of who you're trying to
Okay.
reach out to.
So marketing, you have a little bit more of an idea. This could be a little more haphazard, yeah. But let's pretend, though, for the purpose of this, that you did have a good focus as to where you needed to go.
So you need to be very strategic in order just to follow up that point, just to have very clear your concept, the way that you're going to approach your customers, what do you need, what do you want.
Yeah, so having a strategic focus, good. Okay.
There's a response on their end that there's shown some interest.
Okay, so there's a response. So I like where you're going with this. Why is there a response? Because it's more active. It's active. See, marketing is more passive, right? If I put up a website, yeah, there's a little bit of work in the beginning, but then it's passive. I can't really control who goes to my website. Sure, I could do SEO, whatnot, but I can control how many times I pick up the telephone. I can control how many networking events I go to. I can control how many times I ask for a referral. If you're in the mindset, if you're thinking of hiring a salesperson or a sales team, really important thing for you to keep in mind is, are you hiring a hunter or are you hiring a farmer? Now, I think there's a lot of good farmer salespeople out there, but there is a huge difference between farming and prospecting. Prospecting is a high rejection business, right? So one thing I want you to think about is, in your world, what are we doing for prospecting? How are we proactively getting in front of people? And oftentimes when I'm working with my clients, this is where they come to me because they say, I don't know how to do this. Or they say, I'm afraid to do this because of the high rejection. But it's a numbers game. And in a place like New York City, there's so many ways that you can prospect. LinkedIn is a great tool for prospecting. Being part of organizations like this, great opportunities. The Columbia Alumni Network, tremendous. But suffice to say, you should have a plan when it comes to prospecting. How many outreaches am I going to make every day, every week, every month? That's proactive. So that's the first part of the formula. Now here's the second part. All right, so it's the number of opportunities you get in front of times your closing percentage. So for every 10 people that get in front of me, what percentage of them do I close? What is my closing percentage? This is another metric that you should know of. If you don't know your closing percentage, that's okay. Moving forward, start thinking for every legitimate opportunity. And we'll talk about what represents a qualified opportunity versus just talking to somebody. All right. And then the last thing, right, is the average size of a deal. So real simple math, right? If I see 100 opportunities, I close 20% of them, and my average deal is, let's say, $5,000. How much is that? What's my production? So 100 times 0.20 times 5,000.
How would, like, a lot of us here are startups. So how would you recommend us starting to build these metrics? Because it seems that you have to experience this to be able to come up with this formula.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, you know, I was probably lucky. The first person I ever talked to became a client. Like, you know, lucky.
So it's a good question. And again, depending upon where you are in your company, you might not be here. But the point I want to make is that you need to be looking at the sales aspect of your business like a formula and a process. Because if you're not, right, you're just doing hysterical activity. Now let me just give you quick math here. Let's pretend you were able to increase this number by 20%. So you got in front of 20% more opportunities. You increase your closing percentage by 20%. You close 20% more deals, and you actually increase the size of a deal. You went after larger customers. Maybe you did a better job of upselling, cross-selling. Quick math, 1.2 times 1.2 times 1.2. What is that? So it's about 1.75. So you can have a 75% increase in your production by just making these minor tweaks here, right, in how many people you're getting in front of, your closing percentage, and the average size of your deal. But the question was brought up by Dalton, which is, well, I'm not there yet. How do I know what those numbers are? I don't know what those numbers are, okay? So in the beginning, make them up, right? But suffice to say, you're going to need to do a lot of prospecting in the beginning. So that's the formula, right? So think about how many opportunities am I getting in front of?
So, I mean, one of the things I'm doing is I'm looking at lists, let's say, and actually actively emailing people and then following up and cold calling them. Would you consider that prospecting or marketing?
Yeah. The call, right, is much, much more. See, the email is definitely active, but how many of them do you know even made it into their mailbox? How many of you know they even read? All right. So that's a great strategy of doing the email with the follow-up call. Do you have a number that you try to hit?
I was thinking I want to do like 10 a day.
10 a day. All right, good. So that's 50 a week. What I would say is start thinking how many of those, if you make 50 dials or 50 outreaches, how many lead to an actual conversation? And what I'll talk to you about is we can't control at the end of the day who says yes and who says no. We can't control it, right? Perfect world, I'd love to say that if you put me in front of somebody, they're going to say yes. I can't control that. Here's what I can control. I can control the number of outreach attempts that I make And the next step from there is how many conversations do I have? And then from there I could start looking at how many conversations lead to a meeting, how many meetings actually lead to a follow-up meeting. If you're getting into the demo stage, proposal stage, then you can start tracking these metrics. Question?
Yeah, so from a pure sales perspective, right, we all got the stories of successful salespeople that just basically just work the phones, right? They like put in the hours, increase the top of the funnel,
Yep.
right? This is specifically for non-sales professionals. I assume most people in this room do something else with most of their time besides sales outreach. I know for me personally, that number has to be pretty low for me inside of the funnel. Otherwise, I'm starting to get towards hysterical activity. It's taking away from my bread and butter.
Right.
Right. You know. So for people who are trying to wear multiple hats, I mean, at least for me personally, like the focusing on closing, message, you know, marketing, having more deal flow come to me, as opposed to having prospects, you know, and or trying to tweak the size of deals. But that's tricky too, because the bigger a deal gets, I think often the lower the closing percentage gets, unless you're a very experienced salesperson.
Right.
So basically, I think at least for me, the biggest challenge is sort of in that middle box, which is really trying to figure out how to meet the needs most efficiently. How to understand what the person's looking for, what their needs are, and where that middle ground is that, you know, and to actually construct the right deal structure quickly, so it doesn't take too much time away, right? And if it really came down to a numbers game, then I would be looking for external help, right? Because you know, pumping more deals through the funnel isn't something that I necessarily want to do.
Yeah. So you bring up a great point, right? Depending upon where you are in your business, you might not have the ability to get on the phone. So you might have to get much, much better at your closing percentage. We'll talk a lot about this middle piece, because a lot of this middle piece, your closing percentage, is a direct reflection of your actual sales process, right? So as I shared with you, we'll do formula. Here's the formula. Now let's talk process. Is it okay if I erase this? So let's talk sales process. What I'm going to ask you to do before we get into the actual selling piece of things is let's look at this from a buyer's perspective. As I mentioned to you, if you don't have a well-defined sales process, you're most likely defaulting to your buyer's system. So let me take you through a couple of steps that buyers have a tendency to take salespeople through. Sometimes they're doing it purposefully, other times it's just a defense mechanism. But generally speaking, all right, one of the first steps of any sort of buying process, which I know it might sound a little bit harsh because I have the word mislead in here, but typically the first step in any sales interaction, right, there's a form of what's called misleading of interest. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by that, because like I said, I know that could sound a little bit harsh. Buyers have a tendency to downplay interest, especially when they're getting outreach from a salesperson. What do you think misleading about interest might sound like?
We have this already.
Yeah, we have this already. We're good. When in fact they don't. Good. What's another one?
Kind of the opposite. They're just kind of just trying to be nice, or just like kind of they don't know what else to say.
Yeah, so that's a positive mislead. Positive mislead, right? Gee, oh, really glad you called. You sound like you have a great company. Tell me more about it, right? So there's a positive mislead, there's a negative mislead, right? What are some other negative misleads?
We don't need it. It's very common.
We don't need it, right? We don't need it. We're good. We'll get back to you, right?
We may not have the budget for this cycle, but the next, right?
Yeah.
We want all the info now.
Yeah, we might not have the budget for it. All right. So there's a little bit of a mislead going on, and I don't default buyers for this because it's a little bit of a protection mechanism. People love to buy, but they hate to be sold. And so let's illustrate this point. All right. Let's use, tell me your name again? Peter. Peter, I don't know if you are, but let's pretend you're in the market for a couch. Where do you live, Peter? You live in Brooklyn, okay. You familiar with Raymore and Flanagan's?
Yeah.
Raymore and Flanagan's, for those of you that don't, it's a furniture store. So Peter does some research. Peter's got the color. Peter has the fabric. He has that he wants to spend about $1,500 for a couch. And armed with his information, Peter walks into Raymore and Flanagan's on a Saturday morning. Salesperson says, "Can I help you?" And what does Peter say? Yeah, just looking, right? So you could see that the process is a little defunct. It starts off with this, I'm lying to you because I need to protect myself, because if I were to tell you all the things, what might you as a salesperson do?
Spend is exactly what he wants. I've got exactly what he wants. This is my commission, this is my markup, I'm going to put this at 50.
Right. So I'm maybe going to try to sell him something more expensive, or maybe I'm going to sell him something that I could have sold him for $1,200 for $1,500. Right, so there's a little bit of this like self-protection that's going on. But suffice to say that people love to buy and they hate to be sold. So when we talk about outreach, all right, question to ask yourself is, am I trying to sell somebody too soon in the process? You know, there's so many times I see these outreach emails that tell me all the wonderful solutions that someone's going to help me with. We haven't even had a conversation about whether or not I even need it, okay? So they mislead about interest. They downplay, we call that a negative mislead. They can also exaggerate interest, we call this a positive mislead. Anybody ever get a phone call that says, "Wow, I'm really glad I got you on the phone. We're actually looking at our current existing vendor. We're not too happy. We're open to some other vendors. We need you to come in right away and show us what you could do for us." Anyone had that happen? Not yet? Not yet? All right, it will. We call that the positive mislead.
There's an alternative, and they ask you for a proposal too fast.
Yeah, so they ask you for a proposal. So remind me your name again? Per. Second step of the buyer system, right, is that they want to gather information. Right? They want to know what you know. Now, depending upon your world, right? Sometimes people do presentations, sometimes people do demos, sometimes people will put together elaborate proposals, all right? But there's a part of the process where they want to get this information, right? So why don't you come in, tell me what you can do. Can you come in and do a presentation? Can you do a capabilities review? And now we go in there as salespeople and we're pretty excited because why? Yeah, so this is great, this is mine. I finally got someone that's going to listen to me, right? So we love this part because they want information. We give them information. Now, I'm a big believer in life that you have to give a little to get, but there's a problem that at the end of this, when you give them a lot of information and you say, "What would you like to do?" Sometimes they say, "Yeah, this sounds great and we're in business together," but what usually happens at that point? Yeah, right? So they move into like another form of a mislead. All right, so the next step here is their job is they sound positive. They sound really positive. Your name is? Sebastian. That was great. That was a phenomenal presentation. Outstanding slides. I really love the font that you use, so on and so forth, right? You know that you're moving into step 3 when you get a lot of that positive reinforcement, right? Christina, that was excellent. Really appreciate you coming in and showing what you can do for us. ... What we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at a couple of other vendors. We're going to bring this back to the committee. Maybe for those of you selling into smaller clientele, I need to go talk to my spouse. I need to go talk to the boss, right? So there's some form of another mislead here. So we also call this part of the process SYA. Anyone want to guess what SYA means? See you again? Close? String you along, right? It's called string you along. So sounds good, we'll get back to you. Then you don't hear anything for a while. Then you might hear a little, "Oh, but actually we have another question for you." And then they go back to this step where they want to get some more information. Okay.
Do you see this as a valuable step in the whole buying, like what's the approximate, how do you go about this, like what's the benefit, what's the value, what prices look like you know, like get a sense of a feel so they don't feel like they're totally fish out of water. You can completely get sold something that's not of any use to them, right? So it's sort of, it's the buyer educating themselves to a certain extent as to what the value proposition is. The problem is that it's stepwise as opposed to like two-way, right?
Right. So the thing for you to think about, which I'll throw out to everybody, all right, it depends on the buyer. Now, I think that there's good buyers out there. There are legitimate buyers that they want to do business with you or somebody like you. They have a need. They want to engage. But I also believe, and I've experienced this and my clients have experienced it, that there are also bad buyers out there. All right, what does a bad buyer look like? Bad buyer goes, gets all of your information, all of your suggestions, right, all of your free consulting, and then what do they do with it? They use it for themselves, and how much do you get paid for it? You get paid nothing, okay? So that's one aspect of it. There's another time where if I'm working with, let's say, Claude, right? Maybe Claude's we've been working together for a while, but I'm getting a lot of pressure that I need to have my vendors lower prices, right? If I get another price on the table, what could I do? What could I use that with for Claude? Right, I could squeeze Claude to lower his price, right? So I used you, Sebastian, for your information to go back and get Claude to lower his price, right? And so now you've done all this work in the thought that you're going to get business, and all I did was use it as leverage. And that happens a lot too, and there's a lot of sophisticated buyers out there, okay? The reason why I'm bringing this up, I know you didn't really come here to talk about how people are buying, but I think it's important that you understand this process, because the longer you stay in steps 2 and 3, right, that eats up cash flow. And by the way, when you're in steps 2 and 3, you're busy, so that means you don't have time to go and do what? Yeah, you don't have time to go prospect, right? Who wants to prospect? I can't prospect. I'm working on this deal. I got to make revisions to this presentation. I have to work on the proposal. And then all of a sudden, time goes on, you don't close, and so you have no opportunity, and by the way, you didn't put anything into your pipeline. So after this goes on and on and on and on, okay, oftentimes you move into step 4. We call this the sales witness protection program, all right? Your buyer goes into hide mode. And here's where now you are deciding, do I leave that 3rd voicemail message? I don't want to be a pest. But a couple of weeks ago, right, you were hot stuff. They wanted your information. So here's the buyer system, okay? You can see this in really, really fast, lightning speed. Go to a Staples, right? Person starts looking at the printer, salesperson comes over, says what? Can I help you? No, just looking. Well, my name is John. If you need anything, come. I'm happy to tell you about it. Finally, you engage John. John tells you everything about all the printers. And by the way, there's this protection plan that you definitely need, and so on and so forth. And a person says, well, let me think about it, right? And then they leave the store, and what do? Yeah, they go buy it online, right? So it happens fast. It can happen long. It can happen quickly. It's a default mechanism for a couple of reasons. One is they might just be looking to get free consulting. The other is that it's just that they don't know any different. And if you come across like a typical salesperson, this is their way of kind of keeping you back. A couple of questions, and then we'll move off of this. Who's in control in this process? Buyer, right? Who's doing all the work? Seller. And then here's the last question. Who's emotionally involved in this process? Yeah, we're totally emotionally involved in this process. And the longer 2 and 3 goes on, the more we convince ourselves, no, I can do it, I can close it. And if you're at that point, then you know you're heading in the wrong direction.
It's not the same as a relationship.
Yeah. Well, There's a lot of applications for sales in life, right? There's a lot of applications for sales in life. All right, so I want to throw this out. Who finds themselves in this system more often than they'd like? Now, who's too new to selling to even know that this system exists? Okay. And who's got a really great system that, hey, this never happens to me? Okay. So it might not be happening to you. And if it's not happening to you, great. If you're not out there yet, be aware of this system. Because this system is designed to turn you into an unpaid consultant. And we all know what the prognosis is of a new business owner, right, that does a lot of unpaid consulting. They're probably not in business that long. Okay. So someone had a hand raised. Question?
Yeah. So I guess you all many of us know about this, but there's one learning that if you can't make them talk about their needs, you may never make anything happen. You might as well go away very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about trust and all the things, but if you don't know what need you're answering to, you will never trust.
Yeah. So did everybody hear that? I'll repeat it. If you don't know what the need is, right, you're never going to close them, and we'll touch on that too. So now, buyer system, let's talk about a process, okay? Something that you can implement to combat this, if you will, to give you more control, make you less emotionally involved, all right, and essentially help you to figure out what's an opportunity and what's not. Now, who has seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross? Yeah, it's like a great movie. If you haven't seen it, based on a David Mamet play, Alec Baldwin has a cameo in the beginning. Alec Baldwin puts 3 letters on the chalkboard. What are the letters? ABC. And what do they stand for? Always be closing. Okay. I don't subscribe to that mindset. I don't. When you're always in a closing mode, what's the one word you're always looking for? You're looking for yes, right? So I think that in sales, you have people that go into everything like it's a yes, and if they won't get yes, they will accept some form of a not yes, like a maybe, like a in 6 months, like a think about it, okay? My belief is that the best word you want to hear in sales is still yes, but the second best word is what? No. And if you're going to get the word no, when do you want to get it? As soon as possible. As soon as possible. All right? So I think this is also part of the challenge, especially for those of you that haven't sold before, right? No, you look at no as maybe it's rejection. We look at no as being such a negative thing. But I believe that a no can be really positive if you get it right away. It's when you look at everything like it's a yes, like in that case, Sebastian, when somebody calls up and says, boy, I'm glad I got you on the phone and I'm really excited to get you in here, you're going into that now with a yes. This is a yes. So you start missing all the red flags. So I told you people love to buy, they hate to be sold. Okay, write that down. The other thing I'd say is a no is okay. And if your sales process is not designed to help you weed out the no's, then you're going to spend a lot of time in steps 2 and 3. All right, so let's talk about sales process. Any questions on this? Make sense? Yeah.
Let's say you're stuck in steps 2 and 3, and they're like you said, stringing you along, and you as a salesperson have the right to say no. Like, I mean, that's your job is to sell. So, like, can you yourself say no? If you know that's not good, if you saw the red flag and it's been 6 months and you're talking to people or how long.
Yep.
Is that socially acceptable, or is it business acceptable as a salesperson to say no?
Okay, so it's a great question. Everybody heard Sebastian. Is it okay for a salesperson to say no? All right. The smart answer I'll give you, meaning the smart aleck answer, is it depends on your sales manager. Okay. But the real answer is that I used to go into sales, and I started in sales at the age of 22, right? And I called on people. My customers were probably 30 to 40 years my senior. So I was always in this very subservient type of mode to my buyer. Now, when you're in a subservient mode to your buyer, right, you're probably not going to say things like no or tactfully push back. So if you feel that you're in a subservient mode to your buyer, and I get it, they have money and you don't, and you want their money, but the sales process, right, really should be about a conversation of equals. So it's my belief that as a selling professional, that you have rights in the process. And part of the rights in that process is being able to say, Sebastian, based on what you're looking to do and based on what I do, I don't think there's a fit here. All right? I think you can say it with tact, and we'll talk about examples. I mean, Christine, I think we had a situation like that, right? Where you had somebody that they were trying to do all this, okay? And it's your right to say no. And we'll talk about how you can do that very tactfully in a way that's not confrontational, but it asserts your rights in the process and gives you a little bit more control, all right? So let's talk about what a sales process might look like. Have you do another exercise. If you could write down on your, whatever you brought with you, here's the question, okay? I'm working with your competitor. I am happy, but I am interested and open for some other options. Tell me, what are the 3 reasons why I should do business with you or your company? So think for a minute, and I want you to jot down 2 or 3 reasons why I would want to do business with your company. Okay, someone feel like they have 3 good reasons if they got that question? Again, currently working with your competitor, currently working with competitor X, we're happy, but we are open and exploring other options. Tell me, what are the 3 reasons why we should do business with you? Okay, so one of the reasons is you are cheaper. What else?
And also you have a higher quality.
It's okay, I have higher quality. Okay, good. Give me your 3rd one.
And then you have a unique one that the other companies they don't have. For example, like you have data. For example, like our map, we design it and then we have special packages for that. So it's different from other competitors.
Okay, so you have more of a customized approach. Okay, good. So you have price, you have quality, and you have customized approach. All right, I'm going to give you one little piece of advice. Do with it what you will. Never, ever, ever, ever say that you're the lowest price. Okay? If anybody asks what makes you different, never, ever, ever say that we're the lowest price. If anybody asks how much this costs or your price, you're expensive. Because if you compete on price, it's a race to the bottom, right? So you never want to compete on price. But you talked about quality and you talked about customization, and I like those. Let me hear some others. Let me hear some others.
I am not going to go into 3 reasons about why I think I'm great. I want to ask what they're getting from the competitor, what they like, and what their pain points are, where they're missing, and then I can jump in and say,
Okay.
fill in the blanks there.
Great. Your name is?
Lisa.
Lisa, okay. So we're gonna earmark that. Let me hear some others.
We can bring a new creative approach to the client.
Okay.
Completely different because we know very well what they're doing, and we can have a completely different.
So we can bring a completely different approach. Good. What else?
And the energy and loyalty to have a client like him, like that kind of company.
Okay, so the energy and loyalty. All right, what else?
And that's it.
All right, good. Maybe 3 more?
We understand your industries, so we know your challenges.
Okay.
And we have others we would work with.
Okay.
And the second one, I would say that of those we are working with, we have very happy customers which we can show you. So we have others we can work with.
So we have happy customers and we understand, we have expertise. Okay, good. All right, now, there's a bit of a trap, all right? It's what I call a trap exercise. I think Lisa wasn't falling for my trap, okay? What's the mistake in that?
You're talking about yourself.
Well, you're talking about yourself, right?
Their needs.
Now talking about their needs, right? If I brought your competitor in and asked them the same question, what do you think they would say? They'd say the exact same thing, right? Now we are stuck in our world and our business, right? But the point is, if they hear the same exact thing, okay, then they say, I got another salesperson, let me put him into this system, and now we're commoditized, right? So Lisa's approach was different, all right? And so what I want you to think about, I have here what's called a pattern interrupt, is interrupt the pattern. They're expecting you to say those things. Why should I do business with you? Well, let me tell you the reasons why I should do business with you. Okay? And then you start saying all the things that essentially make you sound exactly the same. And as I said earlier, people love to buy, they hate to be sold. And the other thing I'll add on to that is people buy for their reasons, not yours. So let's take that same question, and I'm going to apply what Lisa said, right? So I'm currently working with competitor X, right? I'm happy, but I am open and looking for some other options. Tell me, what are the 3 reasons why I should do business with you? Right? So not sounding like a salesperson, you go in and say, well, gee, Christina, that's a great question. Christina, let me tell you the reasons why our clients are working with us. And then you could start listing off a couple of things that are in your best interest. Right? They like to work with us because we have a certain expertise in the market, because we give a customized approach. All right? And then here's the caveat. But Christina, depending upon what you're getting from competitor A and what you're not getting, I don't know if we are any different. Right? So the way you start off a selling relationship, okay, is essentially trying to break this pattern. We call this what's known as disarming honesty. And to the point that was made by, your name is? Joelle. We need to quickly flip it around and make it immediately, as soon as possible, about the buyer.
But I have a question a little. If you do that straight away, it's most often too early. If you don't have anything to say about who you are and where you come from, what you do, then they won't start talking about themselves because they have no interest. They aren't fascinated about you. That's
right.
why I think it's interesting to say that we know something about what you do and where you are, and the typical challenges are so and so. And does that sound? How does that resonate to you? Mm-hmm. So I think you need those initial talks.
Okay. So that's a great point, right? What do you do on an outreach? Well, I want you to take a look now at the next 5 sales emails that you get. And most sales emails that you're getting start off with a little paragraph of what I call fake sincerity, like great website, right? It's like so fake. And then the next thing talks all about you. Our company does this, we do that, we do that. Paragraph 3, we'd like to take an hour of your time to tell you a little bit more about paragraph 2. How does Tuesday or Thursday of next week work for you? That is completely seller-centric. The second thing is that it tells me nothing about my problems. So when you're thinking about your outreach, are you going in there prescribing a solution right away, or are you actually talking about problems that somebody might be experiencing? Because people don't know what it is that you do. People know their problems. So let me give you an example. If I'm doing an outreach with a business owner, I do a lot of work with business owners who are selling themselves, right? They have to go out and sell. I can go in there and I can talk about my company and I could say all the great things and I help people close more business, blah, blah, blah. But that has nothing to do with them. So if I'm doing an outreach with, and I'll use Lisa, I'm sorry I'm picking on you right now, but Lisa, for an example, I'll say, Lisa, my name's Dave Fischer. My company is called Sandler Training. We do sales and business development training. Lisa, when I speak with business owners like yourself, here's some of the things that they're telling me. They tell me things like, wow, they have a really good product, they have a really good service, they've never been formally trained, they're not quite sure how to engage their prospects. In other times, they're good at engaging their prospects, but they don't know how to close the deal. And then I have others that they are really good at doing these presentations, and they find out that they're just doing a bunch of free consulting. Now, Lisa, I'm not sure about your world, but are any of those things worth a conversation? And that's really how you should be starting off. Somebody brought up in the beginning, how do I start the conversation? Think of a series of problems that your prospective buyer, and it doesn't have to be negative, you could think of it in terms of a gap. What might they be saying at a meeting, at the breakfast table, when they're out with their friends, that if you can then reiterate those 2 or 3 or 4 problems, they say, wow, that's exactly what's going on in my world, tell me more, right? Because it's more about a conversation than it is about a presentation. So when you think about your pitches and how you're reaching out to people, and if we had more time, I'd give you an exercise where you would actually work on your pitch. Look at your pitch. If your pitch contains the words I, we, my, mine, more than once or twice, then you need to rewrite it, all right? And so think of verbiage like, our clients choose to do business with us because, when I speak with, insert the name of the decision maker that you're talking with, here are some of the things that they are telling me. Okay? It's a way you're demonstrating credibility because you're saying, hey, I'm out there, I'm hearing people, I know these are the problems, and by the way, there's no sale unless you tell me, hey, we have a problem to begin with. So what I think happens oftentimes is we go in too quick to push a solution, and we haven't even spoken about the problem, right? And that's key. So it's all about really interrupting that pattern, right? What do you have to sell me? Well, I don't really have anything to sell you at this point. I was just looking to have a conversation about problem A, problem B, problem C. If you're not having any of those, we're done. Right? And I wouldn't be that flippant, but I'm just illustrating that it's okay if they don't have any of these problems, right? So first step in your sales process, if it's your email outreach, if you're making cold calls, right? Are you talking about problems or are you talking about solutions? And if you're talking about solutions, people aren't listening. People know their problems. Does that make sense? All right? So be disarmingly honest. You know, we do a lot of training on cold calling. Okay. Anybody do cold calling? Anybody should be doing cold calling? Okay. And what does a typical cold call sound like? Did you say click? Yeah, click. Right? Right, because if you trigger anything that sounds like a salesperson, they hang up on you. Who's someone I haven't called on yet? Your name is?
Alex.
Alex, all right, haven't called on Alex, right? So if I'm making a cold call to Alex, all right, if I say, hey Alex, this is Dave Fischer, I'm looking for some help. What is Alex going to say to that?
Help with what?
Help with what, right? Or he might say, how can I help you? Right? I don't want to sound like a salesperson, right? Because if I sound like a salesperson, I say, hi, Alex, this is Dave Fischer, and I'm glad I got you. How are you today? Boom, salesperson, click. So it's all about interrupting the pattern, right? Christina, this is Dave Fischer. I'm looking for some help. How can I help you? Well, Christina, not sure if you and I should be having a conversation. Let me take a minute. I'll tell you the reason why I called, and then you can let me know. All right? So it's about interrupting the pattern. So you don't have to sound like this salesperson. You don't have to go in there and use this lingo. Just have a conversation. Be yourself. Don't sound salesy. All right? All right, second step. Second thing for you to think about. Who was it that touched on that said closing? Said they can't close the sale or they wanted help on how to close the sale? Yep. Remind me of your name again? Sharon. All right. The longer the sales call goes on, the more the pressure we feel, right, as salespeople. How am I going to bring this to a close? How am I going to bring this to a close? Right. What I would say is do it up front. Do it up front. and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but people won't be afraid of you if they know what is going to happen next. Right? So oftentimes the fear when I go to meet with a salesperson, or if you're going to sit down with a salesperson, what is a fear that buyers have when they're interacting with salespeople? They're going to try to sell them. They're going to buy something they don't want. They're going to be overcharged. It's going to be a low pressure or a high pressure situation. Which one? Depends on the seller, but do you think it's more buyer? What are you more worried about? Yeah, being pressured, right? I don't want to feel the pressure. All right, and you hear all these different closing techniques like the alternative choice close, which is well, I'm sorry, not the I was thinking of the impending event close, which is Claude, you don't have to buy today, but the price goes up on Monday, right? So you hear all these different things. So point being is that if you let your buyer know up front what's going to happen, all right, they're not going to get upset about it. So Sharon, let's use you for an example, all right? There's typically 3 things on every call you should establish with your buyer. Time, agenda, outcomes. So Sharon, let's just pretend for the purposes of the role play that you and I have agreed on the phone that we were going to meet for an hour, right? So that's just the setup of the role play. I'm not going to give you too much more there, right? So if I'm going to start off the call, right, Sharon, we might have a little bit of bonding and rapport. Hey, it's great weather, right? Say, so Sharon, I know we set aside some time for today's meeting. How much time do you have?
Oh, I have about an hour.
Have an hour, okay. Is that a hard stop?
Yes.
Pretty hard stop, okay. So Sharon, to make this a good use of your time, what would you like to cover in that hour?
Oh, I'd first like to tell you what I'm having trouble with.
Okay. What else?
And then hear about, why you think you have a better product.
Okay. Anything else?
And then let's see if I have a need.
Okay, great. On my end, are you okay if I ask you some questions just to get a sense as to things you might have done in the past to fix problem A? Is that okay? Great. Now, Sharon, what I find typically at the end of the hour, we'll come to one of 2 decisions. We might decide it doesn't make sense to go on beyond the meeting. On the other hand, we might see there's something for us to continue moving forward. Is that fair? Okay. So now, that was the beginning of the sales call. What did I tell her I wasn't going to do? Wasn't going to sell her. We were going to just do what? She's going to have a conversation and talk, but there is going to be an outcome though, right? What was the outcomes that you heard? So we might have another conversation, or what's the other outcome? That's it. So to your point earlier, can you tell somebody no? Absolutely. Let them know up front. Sebastian, I've been doing this long enough to know that at the end of the hour, one of 2 things typically happens. The first is we decide it just doesn't make sense to go any further. I'm okay with that if you are. And again, this is where use your own style, okay? But there should be some form of a no is okay. And then the second thing is define what a yes means, right? We don't know what yes means. Maybe in my sales process, yes means that I'm just going to have another meeting where we'll involve other people. Maybe a yes means that I'm going to put together some work and come back to you. But define what yes means for your buyer up front, because now if you've done this well and you're worried about closing, you've taken all the pressure off of yourself. So now what you've done is you've set up an environment here of trust, comfort, and equal business stature. Notice I told Sharon what I wanted to get out of the meeting. It wasn't one-sided, right? So you assert yourself. These are things I'd like to know. Plus it also makes it easier for you to ask questions. I've made the mistake where you go into somebody, maybe you didn't do this, and you start firing questions at them, and they look at you like, is this an interrogation? And then they shut down. So remember, people won't get upset with you if you let them know in advance as to what's going to happen next. Right? So that's what I mean by setting upfront agreements. You could do these at the beginning of a sales call. You could do this at the end of an interaction. Who brought up the point about the proposal? They get asked for the proposal? Per, was that you? Yeah. So you could do an upfront, if somebody asks you to do work, right? Why don't you put together a proposal? Hey, that sounds great. I would be happy to do that. Okay? If I got it over to you on Friday, you saw it, you liked it, what would happen next?
I'm more into the situation where they ask for a proposal as a way to not turn you down, but really they don't want it.
Yeah, so that's probably too soon. But the point being is, again, you have rights in the process as a salesperson. So if somebody's going to ask you for a proposal, right, you're just asserting, listen, I'd be happy to do that, right? Let's bring the future to the present. If I did that, you loved it, what would be the next steps on your end? Well, we'd be willing to move forward with a decision, yes or no. Great. Then now you have your upfront agreement, and you know it makes sense to invest time and money. If they say something like, well, we need to do this or we need to do that, suddenly you're thinking maybe this isn't a legitimate buyer. So you could always assert your rights in the process.
Do you think it's okay to answer, which I do maybe harshly then, that yes, I would love to put together a proposal, but I need to know more about your needs before I do?
Yeah, so if you get a proposal too early, I think that's a great thing to say. You know, based on the conversation right now, I don't even know what it is we're trying to fix. You know, at best it would be a guess proposal. So can I make a suggestion? Can we back up a little bit? Maybe we could take 15 minutes, have a conversation, and then we'll see if it even makes sense for me to put together a proposal. Now, if at that point they say, no, I don't want to have a conversation, well, you got your no, and you just saved yourself time doing a proposal. All right, so these two things right here, if you're thinking about your sales process, right, we got to create an environment, trust, comfort, equal business stature. We need to create the relationship. I'm not trying to sell you something. I want to have a conversation about you, a conversation that is going to have some sort of an outcome. And that outcome isn't that I'm going to shove a purchase order under your nose, but we'll figure out together what the next step is, right? So here's now where you move into what's called qualifying, all right? We need to figure out, and I put up the word here, pain. Another way to think about it is gain. But essentially, we need to figure out, from your buyer standpoint, what is personal, what's compelling, what's emotional. Because people ultimately won't buy, right, until they've discovered a personal, compelling, emotional reason to buy. Another way to think about it is people will buy emotionally, but they justify intellectually. So here's where you essentially need to be doctors. You need to go in there. You really need to figure out things like, how long has this been going on? What have you done to try and fix it in the past? How did that work? Is doing nothing an option? How is this impacting you personally? Because to Per's point, if you don't have, or if your buyer doesn't have any sort of pain, what do you think is the likelihood that they're going to buy from you? None. So your sales process should start off with trying to really find out what is their pain. Now, sometimes people will, if you've done a good job up here where you've created a good environment and they feel like there's trust, people will open up and they'll tell you their issues, okay? But some people won't. I've had people go in and say, well, can you tell me your pains? I mean, that's probably not the way to go about it either. Some people don't know their pains. So again, that gets back to, hey, would it help if I shared with you top line about me, about my company, about the types of clients that we work with? And then I'm going to just throw out probably 2 or 3 what I call pain bullets. Because sometimes if they don't know that they have pain, Well, it's hard to engage in a conversation. All right, and then I'll turn it back to them. Are any of those worth a conversation? Well, yeah, actually, that thing that you mentioned about getting in front of more prospects. Great, tell me a little bit more about that. How long has that been an issue? What are some things you've done to try to get in front of prospects? How has that worked? All right, how's it impacting the business, so on and so forth. So your job is find out what is their pain. Now I'm just curious, show of hands, who's going in more from a standpoint of asking questions, really trying to find what their need is, versus maybe going in more solution heavy? So I'd say, who's more solution heavy? Okay, and the rest of you, who's more going in trying to find their issues? Good. Okay, you should have 5 good questions that you go in there with, okay? But around those parameters, right? Trying to figure out what exactly is the issue. Here's a great question to ask to find out at the end, is this a legitimate opportunity? You can simply say, before we go any further, if we did nothing, can you live with it? If they come back and say, yeah, I guess I could, what's the reason for change? Or what if you're trying to oust an incumbent and they tell you during the whole call and they say, oh, I hate competitor A, they're horrible, and they never call me back, and they're this and they're that, and we're thinking in our minds, great, I have a sale, all right? Sometimes the pain of change might be greater than the pain that they're in. So another good question to ask, all right, is Sharon, you mentioned that you're working with competitor A, and I'm not saying that we're there yet, but if you did decide to move forward with us, how do you see yourself ending that relationship? And if they're not comfortable ending the relationship, guess what? You may as well find out now as opposed to when you put the proposal in and then they went and presented it and they said, well, we're going to do better, we're going to change. So you really need to be good at the pain piece. If you get nothing else out of today's session, right, I would say this, if you really don't, if you walk away from a sales interaction and you say, I have a buyer on the line, so to speak, or I really have a prospect in front of me, really what's their pain? And by the way, it's not the surface level, it's not the first thing they come to you with, because that's always never the real issue, right? What is the personal compelling reason? And can they live without me, or can they live without my solution? And if you don't really know the answers to that, then I would challenge you and say, I don't know if you've really found their pain. And it's oftentimes where your prospective buyer will come to you with what they think is the problem, and it's not. So I think you need to be good in your questioning there to get them to discover what's going on. Here's, by the way, how you differentiate yourself. If you could really get to what is their pain and get them to think differently than every other salesperson that they interacted with, that's right there where you make the sale. Question?
So, quick question here is, do you have a rule of thumb of how many questions it's okay to ask until they get really annoyed with you?
It's a good one. It's a good one. It shouldn't really be a straight interrogation, right? It should be a series of questions where you might then weave in a little bit of a story, where you might talk a little bit. It's a give and take. It's not just let me sit down here, Claude, and I got my clipboard, and you know, so how long has this been a problem? Right? It needs to be a conversation. But if you feel like you're not getting anywhere and you're not getting any pain, and I'll throw this out to the group, if you're in a conversation with somebody and you get the sense that there's no pain, what do you do?
Panic.
You panic? Remember, if there's no pain, there's no what? There's no sale. So I might say, Claude, right now, unless there's something I missed, I'm not getting the sense that there's really anything here that would compel us to talk further. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? well, usually, Claude, at this point, here's some of the things that I'm hearing, and I'm not hearing any of those things. So maybe it's not going on, or maybe I just didn't do a good job of asking the right questions. Now, if you say, no, Dave, there's no pain, say, okay, well, sounds like we can end the meeting early, right? Now, before I leave, I might throw out one more question. Say, well, what would change right now? What would change in a few months that would then cause us to talk again? But if I'm getting that there's no pain, it's okay, no need to panic. It just means that, hey, there's not an opportunity, okay? So did that answer your question? So if you're getting nothing, or if you're getting like the arms crossed and like just, maybe I didn't do a good job up here of establishing a little bit of a relationship, maybe I didn't set a good upfront agreement with you to let you know that this is going to be a conversation and part of it will involve me asking you questions. If I skip this step and I go right into this, you're going to find that a little bit intrusive and abrasive. All right. Okay, moving on. How's everybody, by the way, with time? We got 4:23. I probably got about maybe 15. Yeah. I got about probably 15 more minutes, and then I could open it up to Q&A. Does that work? All right. So once we find pain, the next step we want to find out, we want to have the money conversation. Who came from a household like mine where the messaging was, it's not polite to talk about money? Yeah. And that can screw with your head when you're in sales because you don't want to bring up money. But it's important that you talk about money up front. So I'll go back to Alex. So Alex, if we had a really good conversation about pain and you've been forthcoming and I've identified that you have 4 things specifically that you want to work on, right? What I'm going to do is just simply summarize our conversation. So Alex, let me just summarize everything we talked about. You have problem A, it's been going on for this long, blah, blah, blah. You have problem B. Did I get all that? Mm-hmm. All right. So Alex, would it make sense to talk about the type of investment that people typically make to fix these issues? Sure. All right. And now we're in a budget conversation. Now I can ask him directly, Alex, do you have a budget set aside? He might say yes. He might say no. Then there's the Mexican standoff, right? I don't want to tell you the number because if I tell you the number, then you're going to make your price that high. So the technique is called bracketing. So Alex, based on everything that we've talked about, if we were to fix all of these things, we're looking at an investment between the range of X and Y. We're looking at an investment between the range of $50,000 and $70,000. Tell me, does it make sense to keep going? Sure. All right? So you're comfortable with an investment in that range. Right? You want to have that conversation up front as opposed to sliding it into the proposal at the end. Because what if he was only thinking $20,000 and I threw together a proposal that was $50,000? Well, he's going to go into hide mode now because he doesn't want to have to tell me, well, that was way too much. So have the budget conversation. Real easy to do. Right? Have you thought about what kind of an investment you'd be looking to make? Not really. Well, would it make sense for us to talk about the types of investments people have made at this point? We're looking at a number between this and this. Are you comfortable with that type of an investment? Well, actually, no. And then all of a sudden, the number does pop up. I was actually thinking of $20,000. Now, again, here's a point in your sales process where you can say, can I do something for $20,000? Or do I think maybe we don't have a qualified buyer here? I'll leave that up to you to figure out. But suffice to say, if you don't have the conversation here, you're doing yourself a disservice. All right? Step 5, and my marker's running out. I brought a spare. Step 5, we want to find out now what's called decision. All right? And I don't mean that you get a decision. I mean that you want to find out about your buyer's decision-making process. I want to know things like, and I'll go back to Alex. So if Alex said that he was comfortable with the investment range, Alex, tell me, when would you be looking to move forward with a decision? Pretty soon. Pretty soon means? Okay, and is that implementation or decision like signing off on a contract?
Signing off.
Okay, so I want to find out when. Now, next step I might say, well, Alex, who besides yourself will be involved in this? You never want to ask somebody, are you the final decision maker? Because what do you think they're going to tell you? I make all the final decisions. Okay, so using language like who besides yourself will be involved in this decision. Okay, another good question you can ask is if they've bought what you've had before, what process does your organization typically go through to make these types of decisions? Does it need to go before a committee? Does it have to be looked at by another department? Okay, but ask those questions, because if you skip this and you deliver a proposal, then Alex says, well, actually, Dave, I need to run this by Claude. And shame on you for not asking that question. So we qualify. Somebody brought this up. How do I get better at qualifying? For you to be really good at qualifying, there's 3 things you have to qualify on. And it starts with need, pain. Second thing is you have to qualify your prospect on budget or investment. In fact, I always use the term investment, because an investment implies what? They're getting a return, all right, and decision. Now, if at any point in these 3 steps I'm getting red flags, well, then my mindset shifts from qualify to disqualify, right? That's disqualify, by the way. If they don't have pain, the sale is over. If they have pain but they don't have money, the sale is over. If they have pain and they have money, but they're not looking to make a decision for 2 years, it doesn't make sense for me to really invest a lot of time at this point to pursue this opportunity. Okay, so that's key, right? So we need to be really, really good at qualifying. We need to be really, really good at asking questions and figuring out what their problem is and whether or not they even have a need before we then move into, we'll call this step fulfillment, which is now essentially where we take their pains, what they want to fix within their budget range, within their decision timeline, and you put together the solution, which, by the way, is whose solution at this point? So
it's their solution.
It's their solution, right? Because they were involved in it. So remember when I said in the beginning, you can't convince people of anything, right? So I'll add another one, is people won't argue with their own data. So if I was involved with the solution, what do you think is the likelihood when I finally get the presentation that I'll say, nope, I don't want that, nope. So this is very, very heavy on qualifying. This is light on presenting. And what do I mean by that? By the time you get to this point, you should have already flushed out a lot of the disqualified buyers. By the time you're at this point, your closing percentage should be pretty high. The key, though, is figuring out within here what's really an opportunity and what's not. You know, some people say, oh yeah, I talked to that person at a networking event. They said they're interested. They're in my sales pipeline. Yeah, they said they had money. I didn't ask how much, but they said they had money. They're in their pipeline, right? So the key here is how good are you at qualifying? You have to get very, very, very diligent at qualifying, okay?
So if you're doing all this stuff, I mean, you always hear people come, or a lot of times people come in from the sales staff to come to a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're really having this conversation, why would you even walk in with any sort of sales deck?
It's a great question. Were they asked to come in with a sales deck?
I mean, it depends, yeah. If not,
Yeah.
I mean, why would you even bring one?
Well, I think that a lot of people are trained to go in and basically what I call the show up and throw up model, right? You have a lot of knowledge. Most of the training that happens with people is they get trained on what their products are, and they like their decks, and they like their presentations. So let me come in, give you the dog and pony show, then let me spend the next 15 minutes handling stalls and objections, right? And then at some point, I'm going to start chasing you. So if, let's just say I were called to, why don't you come in and present, my next step is to say, sure, what would you like me to present on? Right? And then when I start to say, well, can I make a suggestion? I've found in my experience that a presentation at this point might be too soon. I don't really know what it is that you're looking for, and I'm sure the last thing you want to do is sit through a 50-slide deck. What if we were to have a 15-minute conversation? At the end of that, we might decide it doesn't even make sense to present anything. How does that sound? Now what I've done is I've set the ground rules that we're going to have a conversation. I think a lot of times if you say, well, we'll come in and show us blah, 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 and I don't ask the right questions, it's too late, because the agreement we have is you're coming in, you're buying us lunch, okay, and you're going to show us a deck that we're going to seem half interested in, and at the end of which we have 5 or 6 standard blow-offs that we'll use. We'll get back to you, this looks good, we need to check our budget, so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Right? Yeah, and I get it. What is step 2 of the buyer system? It's gather info, right? So they want the information up front. And I think here's the challenge as a selling professional, is that tactfully we have to basically say, well, I'm not sure we're there yet. Now you can give a little bit of information, but the goal here is we can't really figure out what we're trying to fix until we know all of these things. And I can tell you, I see this all the time, that people go in and they just present. And I'm thinking of a client that I'm working with right now. They're a software client. All of their competitors, they go in first call, they demo the product, they don't ask any questions. And then at the end of the demo, it's so what would you like to do next? All right, and then they get 5 or 6 standard rebuttals. So what they do is they come in now, and because their competitors are doing this, their buyers are saying, well, aren't you going to show us a deck? They say, well, do you want to see a deck? Or would you rather have a conversation? Because I have like 50 slides here, and I don't even know if 3 of them pertain to you. What I found is probably a better use of your time is let's talk for 15 minutes. Let me find out what it is that you're doing, your social media strategy, so on and so forth. And then after that, we'll see if there's anything that we can do that's remotely different or better. And it disarms people, because now they're saying, what? I'm not going to hear a deck? And now they're open to a conversation. Okay, so let me stop there. I mean, that's a process, right? So if I could break it into 3 chunks, really. Chunk 1 is create a relationship, right? We're not trying to sell people. We're trying to figure out, do they have a problem? And if they do have a problem, do they want to engage in a conversation with us about their problems? From there, we're going to try to truly assess, is this something that they're truly committed to fixing? Is this something that's really impacting them? Are they willing and able to invest to fix it? And are they also in a position to make a decision? We call this qualify. Now, you might have heard the word qualify before you came in here, but what I hope you leave here with is this terminology of heavily qualifying. All right? And then the last phase is closing the sale, which should be much, much easier because you've gotten all the roadblocks out of the way that typically come up if you present too early.
So let's say they said, yeah, actually for a decision like this, it needs to go before the committee or before the board or whatever the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So based on what you said, it sounds like you might go into that conversation telling them a bit about what you've heard to date, and then ask that group what other needs they have or what other pains that they have, or if you've heard everything.
Exactly. As soon as you find out that there's other people involved, well, then you go back up the ladder and say, well, what issues do they have? Because you might have somebody that's buying the product or service, but they're not using it. And the deal gets killed because the users weren't consulted on it, they have questions, so on and so forth. So if you said, well, actually, we need to run it by such and such department, right? Then what I would propose is, how do we get you, me, and them on a call or at a meeting? Because I'm sure they have a lot of questions that we haven't even talked about. So you always want to push for getting those other decision makers involved.
What if the pain is on the user side, on the user level, and the decision maker doesn't see that pain at all, or they're not really conscious of that pain?
It's a great question. Everybody has pain. So what I would think is they have to have some form of pain that's different. In other words, are the users complaining to the decision maker? Is the decision maker's pain that they have to listen to all these complaints, right? And they're just not connecting the pain. So all I would do is think of, for each person in the sales process, what are the gaps that they have? Now, if it gets to the point where they're so far removed, like if it's in an enterprise, then what you need to do is employ what's called they call it a white knight strategy, which is where you need to sell that person, make sure they're completely sold, and have them become your internal champion. But what you really need to do, like let's say, for example, you told me, look, Dave, this has to go before a committee, and there's no way in hell the committee will meet with you. Sorry, Dave, you're a nice guy, but they just don't like meeting with lowly salespeople. All right? So I am going to do my best to see if that's a smokescreen. All right? So remind me your name again? Harsh, okay. So I would say, okay, so Harsh, that makes sense. So Harsh, let's pretend for a minute that you didn't have to bring this to the committee. The decision lied solely on your shoulders. If I were to take you through the solution, would you be able to tell me whether or not you even think this would fly? Because if you tell me you hate it, what's the likelihood you're going to bring it to the committee? Now, if you tell me you love it, then my next step is to say, so Harsh, how do we sell this into the committee? Tell me who's on the committee. Tell me who's going to be for this. Who's going to be against it? What are questions that we haven't talked about that they usually bring up? And we call this strategy rehearsing your prospect. But what I want to make sure is that you're not using that as a smokescreen to politely blow me off. Hey, Dave, listen, if the decision were up to me, really? So are you telling me that if no one else was involved, I came in, we presented, and you loved it, would we be moving forward? Well, and if you are, again, if you're a legitimate buyer and you are on the level and you say, look, Dave, I love this, then the next step is, well, then how do we push this, move this through the organization? Okay? Does that help? All right. So we are at 4:41. We still got 20 minutes if you'd like. Happy to answer questions. If you're going through this and thinking, where does this fit in my world? What's a specific scenario I'm going through? Yeah, otherwise, if you had enough and you're good to go, we can end here. Again, I'm totally up to you.
I have a question. You go through all this, more or less, in a complete way, and you get it back, we love it all, but it's too expensive. So, even though you've gone through the budget and so on. So they would tell you, so if you can cut it like 50%, we would do it. Like the next step would be, like they want to negotiate price.
So in other words, I went through all this, and I got the commitment that this is the budget, right? And then you said...
So they would say 100, and you just took 100, and I say, sorry, we can only do 80.
Okay, so this is where I need to be a little tactful. I'd say, okay, so Per, help me understand. From our last conversations, you share with me you were pretty comfortable with 80. What changed?
Yeah, so I took it to the committee, and they said 60.
They said 60. Okay. So then let's talk about which of these things, let's prioritize which of these things you want to fix. Because we're not going to be able to do...
We think 60.
Okay, well, we have a problem. Now, there's a negotiation. You're asking for $20,000. Okay, in my mind, I want to know concessions. right? So, okay, if you're asking me to give up 20 grand, what I don't want to do is simply say, great, sounds good. What I want to say is, okay, now, if I did a really thorough job here, all right, and I truly established pain, so on and so forth, then I'm going to go into concessions. Say, okay, so on our end, if we were to come down on 20, what would you do on your end? Right? Now, I might also have concessions in mind. Maybe it's payment terms. Maybe it's you're going to give me introductions. Maybe you'll write me a testimonial. Maybe you'll be part of a case study. Things that might be low value to you, but could be high value to me.
I'm just experiencing that this trustful model of doing things. There's also another model out there, which is basically bargaining and fighting.
Yeah. Well, again, it gets back to the are you comfortable saying no? Right? The strength of your conviction is only going to be as good as how much you have in your pipeline. So I will, if I feel pretty good and confident, then I'll be able to walk away. We have a problem. Right? Or if you hear your competitor can do it for 30% less. Well, great. I appreciate you sharing the news with me. I'm certainly upset, but sounds like you're going to be moving forward with them. Well, I didn't quite say that. All right. So sometimes keep in mind that as much as you're sitting here in a room learning about techniques for selling, your buyers are going through courses on how to buy. There's probably 15 different strategies that buyers use on a given basis. One of them is called the flinch. Does everyone know what the flinch is? The flinch means, right. No matter what you say, okay, there is a reaction like you just basically insulted their mom. Okay, it's a move. And I think you also have to realize to some extent that sales and selling, there's a little gamesmanship in this. And when you're dealing with a player, a buyer, you know, they want to play. So I think that if you're going into any sort of a negotiation like that, always know what are the concessions, what are you willing to give up, but what do you want to get in return? You know, what you don't want to do is they say, can you lower your price by 20%, and you say, okay, sure. Well, now you've just set, you're telling them, A, I don't believe in the value of what I'm selling, A, and B, I've now set precedents that whenever you squeeze me, okay, I'm going to drip like a wet rag. Question?
I think also that if you talk about, when you're talking about budgeting, if you're really clear in your negotiations of why you're doing it and why the value is there, especially after already talking about the human gain, you know what it's going to take to do for them.
Yep.
That it's not that far. I feel like at that point, then they're clear as to why it has to be that.
Yeah, if you truly got pain, money shouldn't be an issue. Now, there's this notion of what's called budget versus belief. Budget versus belief. So if somebody's really pushing back on price, I might say, and this is a bit of a tougher conversation, but I might say, Per, can I ask you a bit of a tough question? Sometimes when people really push back that much on price, what they're telling me is that they just don't believe that my solution is going to help them fix these issues. Is that the case here? And if you say, you're right, I don't have belief, well, now we need to go back up here. Or I might say, well, what's an investment that you'd be comfortable making that would give you more of that belief so that we could start a relationship and go from there? But I mean, the thing you don't want to do is cave on price, because if you cave on price, you're basically telling your buyer, A, I don't believe in the value of what I'm selling, and B, it makes it that much easier for you to do that the next time. Now, I know that's hard to do in the beginning when you don't have a lot in your pipeline. But if you stand by what you sell and you truly believe in it, right, price should not be an issue. And if you think about this, most of the buying decisions people make never really comes down to price. I think buyers want you to believe that it has to do with price, but it's never about price. It's never about price.
So I've been on the buy side for a long time,
okay.
And I was actually training from like 5,000 buyers by now. And I think the situation you mentioned there, there's two cases. There's one where it really happens, and sometimes we, with the team, we present something to the CFO, and the CFO will really say, we don't take it for that price. This is the price I want. And I think that's where the really good salespeople would really handle it well. They will not cave in on the price without asking something in return. That was really the basic one. And if they were to give something, it would be 1% after 3 weeks negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
And just by doing this, they also got a lot of respect from the team and from my clients, usually. The other aspect is sometimes as well is if our CFO or the president was asking for another 20%, sometimes they know they can get it for that price, or that's the price that they should get. And I think that's where, as a salesperson, you're in a weak position because everybody knows that this is not the price you should be paying, and you're kind of the only one who doesn't know it.
Yep.
That's kind of bad.
Selling a commodity.
By the way, that technique from a negotiation standpoint is called hot potato. Hot potato means, oh, brought it to the committee, they told me that actually I need to slash my budget. It's called hot potato.
I just want to, even if you do this properly, you might still end up in a very...
You're always going to, yeah, this is not foolproof. This isn't foolproof, all right? But I think when you have a process, you put pressure back on the process, you take it off yourself, right? So if sales calls don't go, or the deal, whatever, you could always tie it back to, I didn't find enough pain, or there wasn't enough pain, they didn't have budget, or I didn't clearly have that conversation, I didn't really do a good job in the decision-making process. Now, you're probably not going to want to hear this, but more often than not, the issues with sales, all the things that are put up there, it's more our fault. It's our fault. Because if we're trying to sell to somebody who's not a qualified buyer, that's our fault. If we're trying to make a qualified buyer out of somebody that isn't, that's our fault. All right. Other questions?
How do you disagree with a buyer in a polite and smart way? Because they're going to say no, no, no all the time, or every single level of this process. How do you disagree as a kind of rule or approach?
Okay.
Because you cannot say no, no, you're right, or they are going to say no all the time, almost. So.
Yeah. So look, if I've thrown out 4 or 5 problems that I think you might have, and I don't know enough about your world to illustrate them, but let's use the example that I brought up about if I was calling you about what I sell, right? And it's Norberto.
Yes.
And I said, typically when I reach out to business owners, here's a couple of things they're telling me. One of the things is they don't know how to get clients. They don't know how to get prospects to come to their door. Maybe they're just not comfortable with it. They just don't have a system. Other times people tell me, hey, they have no problem getting prospects. They just can't close them. So Norberto, I don't know enough about your business. Any of those worth a conversation? And you say no. Okay. Wasn't sure if they would. But now that you are thinking about sales and sales challenges, what is worth a conversation? Now, you can't say no to that, right? You might say, Dave, I have no challenges whatsoever. Say, that's great to hear. I don't hear that a lot, but are you handling all the business you can? Right? Well, not really. Okay. Well, how much more business can you write? So I'm going to try to at least go through a series of questions, but if you start talking about your problems and we get a sense that there is a little bit of pain, my next step is to then say, well, it sounds like this is important. Would it make sense for us to set up some time to talk about it further? Now, once you've agreed that we're meeting, why would you say no at that point, right? The only way we would say no is if we figured out that the problem really isn't significant enough, or maybe you just don't want to invest that kind of money, right? In which case, if it's a legitimate no, then that's all right, because no is the second best word that you can hear in sales. Does that help?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So I think it's in the beginning. Do you want to buy sales training? No. Right? That's a no. But if I start throwing out a couple of issues, so you said that you're competing against timeout, right? So think about what are the gaps right now with timeout. The question came up, what if I'm trying to unseat an incumbent? Right? So here's a very common pain point with big companies, is that they treat their clients like they're a number. They don't feel like they don't have a personal connection. So that might be a pain point. A lot of our clients come to us because they've worked with, right, one of the top 3 in the industry, and they're really frustrated because they feel like the level of service is horrendous. They feel like they have no relationship. In fact, the relationship changes so much, they don't even know who their contact person is. Now, I'm just curious, is any of that worth a conversation? Well, hell yeah. Tell me more. Well, it happens all the time. Can you give me an example? Well, just last week, they switched me. Is that important enough to care about? How's it impacting the business? And now we're in a pain conversation. So if we were to come back to you, show you a way how we could give you customized service, blah, 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 would there be any interest in switching from competitor A, right? But it starts with, did I identify some sort of a problem you might have? Now, if you don't know these pains, you could do a couple of things. One is you could ask your clients why they bought from you. If you don't have clients and you're selling against a competitor, then ask, like, do some research. What is it that they don't like about your competitor that you know you can fix that? But what you don't want to do is go in and say, our competitor does this and bash them, we do this. Because remember, people made a decision at some point and you don't want to make them feel bad about the decision. So that's why you want to always go in with the approach of, they are working with so-and-so. Initially, it was a good relationship, but now they found problem 1, problem 2. Just curious, any of that going on with you? No, actually, we're having a phenomenal relationship with them. Okay, wasn't sure if it would. Things change. Would it be okay if I touch base with you in a few months? Or they say, we're having these problems all the time. Great, tell me more about it. And all you're trying to do here, again, is figure out if they have enough pain to want to meet with you further. Other questions? Yes?
Sounds like the most specific question. First of all, if you are stuck at the process of screen,
if you're stuck here.
You want to push, and then what is the timeline? Do I need to push? For example, I need to wait 1 week, 2 weeks, or longer, or I need to like push in 3 days because I don't want to make them feel like forced.
Sure.
Pressure to make the decision or to.
All right, so tell me this. What happened, like, where did you leave off?
For example, there is a one chance the manager said, let me get back to you because there is another person who is in charge of the whole process as well. So he needs to talk to me. And then I said, okay, let us know when we can talk. And he didn't come back to us. And I said, what's going on now? And could I get the contact of that person? And then he said, probably no. So
okay.
I tried to push, but
yep. All right, so always think of this in 2 terms. Number 1 is, how did I get here? What do I do from here? Mm-hmm. So let's start with, how did I get here? So he used what could have been one of the blow-offs, right? I need to talk to the manager and I'll get back to you.
He is a manager, and then he said there is another person.
There's another manager. Yeah. Did he tell you, though, at any point, you know what, this is great, and I actually can see how this can impact our business? Did you go in and you said, hi, we have such and such product and it does this? So you were presenting?
Yeah, we met in person.
Right, but you went and presented your product?
Yeah.
Okay, did you talk about this?
Yes.
Okay, what is their pain?
Their pain is that, for example, after using the tanning bed, people usually got burned of their skin, right? And then if they don't have the kind of does have them to soothe and then to reduce the irritation, they will get the itching and redness on their face for a while.
Okay, how often does it happen?
Usually people go to the salon once in 2 weeks.
Right, but how many of their existing clients did they say have told them that they've had that problem? Was it 1? Was it 10?
Actually, I'm not sure.
All right. So remember, we need to quantify the pain, right? Sometimes we hear things, we get excited. Yeah, that happened. Okay, can you tell me how many times? It happened 10 times. Now, in your world, is that a lot or a little? Well, that's a lot. Is it enough to care about? Okay, these are like those multi-layered questions to ask. The question I would go back to you is, was there enough pain? Now, if the manager said to you, remind me of your name again? Amanda. Manager said to you, Amanda, I love this, but I need to talk to my manager. Then at that point, I'd want to set what's called an upfront agreement for my next interaction. So Amanda, I understand that you need to talk to your manager, but I don't want to make any assumptions. If the decision solely rested on your shoulders, is this something that you would want to implement into your salon? Yes, definitely. Okay, so what are some questions that the manager's going to have? Or can I make a suggestion? What if I were to come back when he or she is there and the three of us can have another conversation? Yeah. Right? Now, that's kind of how did I get there in the first place. But you're like, all right, Dave, that's all well and good, but what do I do now, right? So a couple of things you can do, right? What's your follow-up look like? Are you calling? Are you going in the store? You're emailing?
Yeah, we go to the stores again. We went to the stores again, and then we email them again.
And you hear nothing. When you went into the store again, manager wasn't there?
We went many times, and then finally we got him, but he just talked to us a little bit, and then said, oh, we will get back to you.
Yeah. All right, so what my little antenna is telling me, that they're being very polite to you. Okay, and I know that's probably not what you want to hear. So what I would do is I would start pushing for the no. Amanda, look, I know nobody likes to say no, but I'm getting the sense that while you like this, there's really not enough of a need for this in your store. Is that fair? Like, allow them to say no. Because what you will find is sometimes if you push somebody towards no, guess what happens? No, I didn't say that. Oh, okay. Well, what exactly?
I can get the exact answer, what they cannot make.
Yeah. I mean, I would push, if all the signs tell you it sounds like a no, then why not just call it very gently? I'm not saying you go in there and you're upset, but this is where tonality is so important.
But will that be an issue that because they have they are a big chain, they have many stores, and then the problem could be like this purchase is in process, and then they are going through like many departments or something like that. It could be like that, right?
All right, so can you read that word? Can someone read that word? Hopium. This is a drug that salespeople are addicted to. It's hopium, right? If you don't have a clear next step with somebody, then you're just basically on hopium. A clear next step is this. Dave, that sounds great. My manager isn't here. My manager makes all the final decisions. Amanda, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Let's take your manager out of the equation for a minute. If the decision rested solely on your shoulders, do you think this would have value in the salon? Because if it doesn't, it wouldn't even make sense to involve your manager, right? Yeah. Okay. No, definitely. I see the value. In what way? Because blah, blah. Okay, now you start to realize they're sold. Okay, so what do you think we should do next? Well, let me go talk to the manager. All right. Well, what are some questions that the manager might have? Is there anything else, though? You know him obviously much, much better than me. What other questions might the manager have? Well, they might want to know about this and that. Sounds like a lot. Would it make sense for me to come back and have the three of us spend about 15 minutes together? Right? So all you're doing is you're just pushing for another step, right? What you don't want to do is leave an interaction with this, what's called a wishy-washy future. Wishy-washy future sounds like, hey, Claude, that sounds good. Why don't you get back to me next week? That's wishy-washy. You got to follow that up. Claude, happy to. What day are we looking at next week? Tuesday. Well, great. Well, if you're like me, I'm all over the place. I find if we don't put a time on the calendar, it'll never happen. What time are we looking at? Okay, that's the assertive part of sales. But if you don't put that on the calendar, it doesn't happen, right? You know, Claude, let me send you an email, Outlook. Can I send you a calendar invite as well? That's what I call a clear future. Everything else, you're relying on hopium. Sounds good, we'll get back to you. You go home, you're all excited. Yes, I got another one. But in reality, what you have is just, we call it in the sales world, smoke. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been through sales training a few years ago when I used to be in enterprise technology sales, and I want to say it is effective. It's probably one of the most prolific sales training methodologies in recent times. And it's interesting how it's adapted a little bit throughout the years and they changed it. But there's certain fundamentals that I see, that's still like the tenements of standard sales training, the upfront agreement or upfront contract.
Mm-hmm.
Was called.
Yeah, it still is. I take out contract in talks because sometimes people get a little. But yeah, who did you do it with?
Oh, I forgot. A long time ago, I knew another guy. He's in Jersey. I can find his name. I'll email him to you.
Yeah, okay.
But it was good. And the fundamental thing about Sandler is that the buyer and seller, it's a mutual respectful relationship. I mean, we're not subservient. We're trying to sell something. Just because we're not trying to sell something, we're not subservient to the person that's going to buy it. And if the buyer doesn't see that, doesn't respect you in that way, then there's going to be no sale.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be one of those on the level. And that's the big thing. So I think one of the big things about sales is the upfront contract.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I liked about it too, is because oftentimes I was from a mindset of, hey, you're the lowly salesperson and I'm the buyer. And if that's the case, if I walk into somebody that has such a negative perception about sales, then you're right, maybe it doesn't make sense for us to continue. Good, other questions, comments?
Do you find that this shortens the sales cycle for like an enterprise type sale?
Yeah.
Do you know based on experience, do you know by?
I think I'd have to know what's going on, right? Like, if you're really being diligent about getting clear next steps and really asserting, can I make a suggestion, right? Well, we need to do this. Okay, well, can I share with you? Worked with a similar client. Here's something that they did. Would that make sense here? You can assert yourself and essentially by asserting your process, you can cut down the sales cycle. I think without a doubt. Look, you could even cut it down to the sense that you get no's much, much quicker. That also cuts down the sales cycle, right? I mean, that's probably one of the bigger ones. All right, we are at 5, we're after 5, we're in bonus time. So a couple of last closing comments, and again, I'm happy to stick around. My card is up there. If you want, my contact info is on the wall. I put out a newsletter every month. I push out a lot of content on sales, on selling. If you want to be on my newsletter, take my contact info, reach out to me, whatever the case may be. I think I'll probably get your contact info. So I'm going to send everybody just a follow-up email that'll include a white paper that summarized a lot of the things that I talked about. All right. If you ever want to attend a free session, I do training in Midtown. You're more than welcome. I do my training typically on Wednesdays. And you're all welcome to be my guest. And feel free to reach out also on a one-off if you have any particular questions. My goal ultimately, like I said in the beginning, help you get better at sales, help you feel better about it in the process. So I do want to thank you for coming. Really appreciate the engagement. I'm happy to stick around for more questions. But if you want to head out and enjoy the rest of the day or the evening, go ahead and we'll be in touch. All right.